Alright guys, we're on section 8.3, page 226 of your student journal, using midpoint and distance formulas. How can you find the midpoint and length of a line segment in a coordinate plane? Eventually we will get to a formula for this, and so if you're good at substitution, it will be super simple, but if not, or even before that, I should show you kind of like the conceptual way of finding it. So you have this line segment right here, finding the midpoint, and you want to know what is exactly in the middle. But if you, for instance, let's start out here real quick. So we have just this imaginary segment, this other imaginary segment AB, and if there are 4 units across, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many do you have to travel to get in the middle? And the answer is the middle of 4 is 2. So really, this is the midpoint right here, because it's in the middle of A and B. So really, I just had to count the spaces between A and B and just split the difference, or go half of it, or divide by 2. Whatever you think. All those, there's a bunch of different ways to express that idea. But because this line is diagonal, it's kind of hard to just split the difference. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break this up into 2 parts. I will say the distance between the 2 points horizontally, which is like that, and I'm also gonna find the distance between the 2 vertically. So here, vertically, there's a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what is half of 6 is 3. So I'll just go down by 3. So I know that the middle is somewhere along here. And essentially you could say, oh, it's right there. Otherwise, you could also go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and say, oh, well, how many is that halfway through? Midpoint means middle, right? So instead of going all the way 8, I'm going to go half of 8, which is just 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I know it must be, I know it must be aligned with this location right here, which again points to this midpoint right here. What is the coordinates? -1, +1. So conceptually, on a graph, visually, I've shown you how to do that. So the midpoint between -5, -2, I'm going to erase some of this so you can see it. -5, -2, and +3, +4 is -1, +1. And these formulas are going to help us find them just using algebra without having to count, just using these numbers and these numbers to get those numbers. Moving forward, add point C to your graph as shown. So I did that. Oh, well, I didn't specifically do that, but whatever. They're taking the same approach here, just creating a triangle out of this. And the Pythagorean theorem you should know, but if you don't, I'll remind you. This is for all right triangles. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So now we're not finding the midpoint, we're finding the length. So here, it's easy to find the length because I can just count. But this way is a little dicier because it's not, exact. If it was like this, you could say, oh, that's 1 unit. But this is not exactly 1 unit. So if you count, and earlier I already said this was 8, and I do believe this is 6. So I have 8 squared plus 6 squared equals C squared. 64 plus 36 is 100. And to solve, when you have a square, then you take a square root, and you get the square root of 100 is 10. So this right here is 10. That's the distance formula. Or sorry, that's not the distance formula. I use the Pythagorean theorem, but the distance formula uses the Pythagorean theorem to find the distance between any 2 points. And that's it. So now we're just going to go into the actual formulas. In your own words, write the meaning of each vocabulary term. A midpoint is a point in the middle. That's kind of obvious. A segment bisector. Bi. What does bi mean? 2 sector as in just like sections. So segment bisector is anything or something that cuts a segment. When I say cut, I mean that splits a segment into two identical or even sections. It's really important that bisector, you have that part for bisector because they do have to be the same for it to count as a bisector. If you're just cutting up into two different segments of different lengths, then it's not a bisector. So if I have something that's this line that's 4 inches, for it to be bisected, it has to go in the middle, and this side has to be 2 inches, and this side has to be 2 inches. If I have the same thing, but I split it up into 1 inch and 3 inches, that's not a segment bisector. Okay, the midpoint divides it into two congruent segments. Segment bisector is a point, ray, line segment or plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. A midpoint or a segment bisector bisects a segment. Okay, so moving on, the midpoint formula. So earlier the example was -5, -2. Actually, let me go back to make sure I have the right thing. -5, -2, 3, and 4. Okay, -5, -2, and 3, 4. So this is saying add and divide by 2, or find the average. Finding the average is the midpoint. So this could be our x1, our y1, and then this must be our x2 and y2. If you had said this was x1 and y1, it doesn't matter as long as both of them are the same. So x2, y2, and x1, y1. If you flipped it and you made these x1, y1, and these two x2, y2, it would not matter. So I have -5, because this is our x, plus 3 divided by 2. And we also have -2 plus 4 divided by 2. So -5 plus 3 is -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. -2 plus 4 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, which is exactly what we got earlier. So this is our example. This is our solution. The distance formula. So again, I'm going to show you guys using our example from earlier. -5, -2, 3, and 4. Again, guys, using this formula is just all about substitution. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So this number will go here. This number will go there. This number will go here. And this number will go there. So x2 is 3 minus -5 squared plus, let's see, 4 minus -2 squared. Don't forget that when you subtract a negative, that's like adding. So I have 3 plus 5 is 8 square plus 4 plus 2 is 6 square, which is the square root of 64 plus 36, which is the square root of 100, which equals 10. So that's how, this is our example, but just going from the Explorer earlier in the section, that's how you get distance. If you, let's see here, an important distinction I want to make is I had chosen -5, -2 as x1 and y1. And some of you might be asking, oh, does it matter? And just like with the midpoint, it actually does not matter. If I said this was x1 and y1, and this was x2 and y2, I would get the same exact answer, which is 10. Okay, so let's go into some extra practice problems. Identify the segment bisector. So identify what is cutting it in half. So this is being cut in half. If this is 13, that means this is also 13. Where is it being cut in half? Right here, M. So you just say point M. Then find AB. So the distance from A to B, which is this whole section. So I have 13 and 13. So how much is that if I combine them? The whole thing is 26. AB, length of AB is 26. Identify the segment bisector. This is ray MC. And then this is line L. And then I will leave you to find AB. It should really not be that complicated. If it's being cut in half, it's going to be the same thing on both sides. So if this is 8, that's 8. If this is 26, that's 26. Let's see here. Identify the segment bisector again. Line MT, or sorry, ray MT. Line M. Point M. Then find, yeah. So now it gets a little more complicated. Not that complicated though. You know that if it's bisected, two things are cut in half. What are they compared to each other though? They are exactly equal. So subtract 2x, subtract 2x. 4x equals 4. Divide both sides by 4. X equals 1. To get EF, I have to find the whole thing. So 6 times 1 is 6. Well, you know if this is 6, this is also 6. Add them together. EF 12 is equal to EF. How did I get that? I added 6 and 6. So again, all these are just writing things like, oh, set them equal to each other, find X, substitute, and add. So find X, and then find X here as well. Okay. The endpoints, find the coordinates of M. So I will show you 7, x1, y1, x2, y2. You just add them together, the x's together, divide by 2. You add the y's together, and you divide by 2. Negative 4 plus 0 is negative 4. Divided by 2 is negative 2. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Okay, moving on. The midpoint and one endpoint. Oh, this one's kind of annoying. So before it was asking, so before it gave us P, Q, and wanted us, I'm talking about number 7, and wanted us to find M. Now though, and the formula is again x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Now it's giving you one midpoint. It's giving you the midpoint and only one endpoint. So here's another way to think about this. You could say this is x1 and y1, and you have no clue what x2 and y2 are. So you say x1, or sorry, 7 plus x2 divided by 2 is equal to, what's the x value for the midpoint? It's 1. So then from here, how you would solve somehow for x2. So how do you get this by itself? Well, you would multiply everything by 2. 7 plus x2 equals 2. And then you would subtract 7. So you get x2 equals negative 5. And then this is your y1. So y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is equal to the midpoint y. And we do the same thing. We multiply by 2. Sorry, that looks like y squared. y2 equals negative 4. Subtract by 2, subtract by 2. y2 equals negative 6. So again, all this comes back to x. So we have this midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2, y1 plus y2 over 2. So again, you guys just have to identify you already are being given the midpoint, so you are being given this part. So you write it out like that. x1, y1, this is the midpoint x. So I'm not putting this at x2 and y2. It's just this 7 plus x2, x1 plus x2 over 2 equals the midpoint, x coordinate. And then y1 plus y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is equal to the midpoint y coordinate. Okay, I do believe that's it. It is indeed section 8.3. If you have any questions, ask your teacher or let me know.